The Paths of Time Are Vast is the fourth full-length album from Black Pyramid. This is a Northampton, Massachusetts-based psychedelic doom metal band, and one that has influences from modern doom metal, traditional doom metal, 70s heavy rock, psychedelic rock. There's a lot that has gone into their sound over time, and I think that conglomeration of sounds back in the late 2000s and early 2010s really did relate to what bands like High and Fire and maybe even a little bit of Mastodon here and there seemed to be the usual kind of comparison made back then. It was their own sound, though. It was much more rooted in traditional doom metal and heavy metal, more so than some of their contemporaries at the time. This was a band that quickly caught my attention when they put out their debut self-titled release in 2009. It was one of my favorite records of that year, and it was one that was, again, it was centered around memorable songs. They were heavy, extremely interesting, and adventurous, and there wasn't a lot of that around at the time in that style. By the time they reached for their second full-length album, a lot had changed. They had sort of buttoned up their sound a little bit, but it remained exceptionally tuneful, and those first two records were really the strength of the band. If you're a fan of what Matt Pike does in general, and you're a fan of early Elder at the same time, you kind of saw where that band fit in at the time and where they were going. It was an exciting thing. They felt like they were one of the big bands that were developing at the time. It was maybe a little bit more interesting for me than what Paul Bearer was doing, even though that was a great thing when it did finally take off. For me, this was always a band I was a cheerleader for until their third record hit. I felt like they kind of rushed out Adversarial. It didn't sound like them. It had a new vocalist, guitarist, who replaced Andy Boreski's vocals, which were very distinct, very particularly melodic, and it was just a different album in a different style. It was no better or worse. It just had missed the soul and the spirit of Black Pyramid up to that point. So at some point, the band split up, and there was an offshoot from the members. Some of the members of Black Pyramid put out a record, Doomsayer by the Scimitar, and that felt much more like a continuation of the original sound. Like, awkwardly enough, it sounded more like Black Pyramid than Adversarial did. I liked that album, but it seemed like the band was over at that point, and now they're back. So what do they sound like? We'll cut to a song here, and we'll find they sound like Black Pyramid again. So it's fitting that the theme of this album is stated as partially is time and mortality and exploration. And I think that's something that really factors into every moment of this record, because it still sounds very much like the Black Pyramid that we knew on the first two records. The elements of psychedelic doom metal, the tuneful vocal cadence, all of that has been improved upon. It's evolved a little bit. It's become more or less ambitious. They're still writing big, roughly 10-minute songs at their strongest point, and those 5 roughly 10-minute songs are really where the album sings overall, 5 or 6. Anyway, the big thing here is that they've expanded into more psychedelic tangents on some of these songs. They put in some more progressive rock elements in the way that they've arranged the record, but they've kept the original sound of Black Pyramid in terms of its nuclear kind of fuzz stated doom metal sound, and the psychedelic metal body of their work is really where it still stands. So if you like those first two records, this really is a continuation of that sound. They brought back the original vocalist, guitarist. In fact, the original lineup is mostly back except for the drummer. The real joy of returning to this record is the sound, the reprisal, the return of the band, and they put out a couple of really big songs to start off this 70-minute record with a bang. And so they're right to this tuneful aspect. The rhythms are more involved than ever. There's a lot more to the band. It really is in parity with a return that you'd want. They've already sold me on that within the first 2 songs, and so where do they go with it from there? A couple more catchy pieces, some of their best songs they've ever written, in terms of Take Us to the Threshold and The Closer, The Quantum Phoenix are some of their best songs. But the most profound risk they take here is probably the title track, which is about 20 minutes total between 3 pieces, and it explores less the storyteller and more compacted feeling of the way that they arrange the usual Black Pyramid song, and it reaches for a more spaced out version of themselves. It breathes a little bit. Otherwise, I can't really overstate the fact that it feels like Black Pyramid has returned with a lot of sense and thought put into what they're doing and why they returned. returned. It feels like this is a meaningful statement overall. It feels like they've returned to their sound in droves and improved upon their general musicianship and presence, and their production values help them realize that along the way. They don't sound like followers, and I think that's a tough thing to pull off. Now, it was 10 years ago, it's even more so now. This is worthy of a high recommendation. It is well above average in all aspects. I appreciate the way they've curated the album art and the general audiovisual experience, but I think the best points of this record were the immersion available to its long form and patient development, as well as just the overall connection available to the songwriting. This is a strong return for the band, and it feels like a very worthy addition to their discography, after I was frankly disappointed with their third record. So if you feel the same, you might enjoy this record as much as I have, which is quite a bit. This releases this Friday on May 3rd. Go ahead and check it out when it does, and read my review for more in-depth thoughts.